changed both Matthew's and Zacchaeus' life. But that's the first thing that I do as a governor. Second thing that I do as a governor is I'm called to supervise all the financial books for the government that I'm in charge of, but also in the process of that, I need to supervise all of the building projects. Keeping the roads clean, keeping the sewers running the way they have to go, keeping the buildings upright like they're supposed to, having fresh water come into the town. We're going to talk about water later on. But that's one of the things that I do. Number two. First, I collect taxes. Number two, I make sure their taxes are used for the best for the public good. Number three, what do? I am the judge. And some of you have Judge Judy or the different TV judges you watch. I was the judge. I was the man. And people would come to me for my decision. People could appeal to Rome. About 30 years after I was done, maybe you may know this guy who was called Saul and somehow met the Messiah, this one that I had crucified, and he changed his name to Paul. Maybe some recall that when he was in Jerusalem, he was arrested and sat there for a couple years, and what did he do? He appealed to Caesar. To appeal to Caesar cost a lot of money. You had to have that money, that financial resource, to pay for yourself to Rome. That's why most people did not appeal to Caesar. They were with me. What I said was law. So I collected taxes. I did all the public works. I was the judge. But also, which is something interesting, for 1900 plus years, I knew what I did, but the church, the Christians around the world, didn't know that I had the authority to do this. They were all calling me a wrong name. You see, I'm a governor who has control over the military. I'm what they used to call a prefect, P-R-E-F-E-C-T. That type of governor. And that type of governor has authority over the military. Sure, I take it, I acknowledge. I only had 3,000 men under my command. Only 3,000. The governor of Syria from Rome had a legion underneath his authority. He had about 5,600 men. But I had 3,000. And what's interesting is 6 out of my 10 years as being governor, there was no governor of Syria, my governor who I would report to, or my one over me. So for 6 of the 10 years, I was in control of it all. Now, being governor, I know I did a lot of things right. And things that I thought were right at the time, and maybe you've had that too. You think you're doing something right at the time, but you look back and you realize that caused problems. When I first came into Jerusalem, when I started my rule in 26 AD, when I showed up, we came at night. We came at night, and my soldiers came with me, and they had the standards bearing the image of Tiberius, the Caesar. I didn't realize these crazy, whacked-out Jews at the time who were very hard-hitted and just, they followed what was called these 10 Commandments. And the 10 Commandments said, one of them said, thou shalt not have any images. I came with these standards with images. For 5 days after we were in town, there were riots. All because of these standards that were put up. So I ordered the standards removed. I'm a smart man, right? I mean, why would I want to have riots of the people that I'm going to be governing over? So I removed the standards. Well, there was a short time later on that there was a water problem within Jerusalem. I decided to build an aqueduct. So I hired the people to do the work. It was all engineered. We built this aqueduct to bring fresh water into Jerusalem. And the aqueduct went to underneath the temple, the Jewish temple. It fed the cisterns underneath the temple. Now, wouldn't you think the people would be happy with fresh water? I would have thought so. But you see, the problem was we didn't have enough money in Caesar's, Tiberius, my account, so we had to use temple funds. And again, the people rioted. But what's not said is the fact that the leaders didn't riot. The leaders didn't lead the revolt. The reality is, the only way I could have used temple money would have been with the leaders' permission, the religious leaders. Caiaphas, Ananias, the high priest's son-in-law. Only could I have used their money with their permission. And I couldn't have had Roman people working under the temple without their permission. Do you follow where I'm going with that? I used the temple money. Nowhere does it say I had their permission, but the religious leaders never said a negative word about it. It was the people. Second thing that sort of is a black mark on my record. The third thing that's the black mark on my record are some golden shields. You would have thought I would have learned my lesson when I put the standards in Jerusalem. A few years later, I decided to set up these shields, these golden shields, in my headquarters. The shields had no image of Tiberius on them. But the Jews revolted again. The Jews revolted for the third time. And this time, I put my foot down. I am governor. I can do what I want. We are under Tiberius. Well, the Jews under me decided that they were going to go to Herod Antipas. Maybe some of you remember who Herod was? Remember Herod killed John the Baptist, the prophet? Maybe you remember that story? Maybe you remember the story that Herod married his sister-in-law, who was married to his brother. Well, the Jews go to Herod. Herod writes a letter to the emperor Tiberius. Tiberius writes me a letter back and says, take those shields down, period. I got rebuffed. And the problem with that letter was the fact that Herod Antipas wrote in the letter, Pontius Pilate is not a friend of Caesar. Meaning, Caesar had his group of friends. Caesar had sort of like his internal group. I guess some of you may know the Old Testament. I've heard before that David had his 30 fighting men that were his close men, his advisors. Tiberius had his group of people that were called the Friends of Caesar. And I was part of that group. When that letter went accusing me not to be a friend of Caesar, I was fearful. It's been 2,000 years since I can remember this, but 3, 4, 5 months later, Ananias and Caiaphas, the high priest and his son-in-law, who probably helped me do the aqueduct with the temple monies, they show up with this Messiah named Yeshua. You know him as Jesus. Yeshua. And in the process, and I'm going to explain that whole trial, but in the process, what do they say to me? You are no friend of Caesar's if you don't crucify him. What is that saying to me? I have just been reprimanded by Caesar. If I don't take care of this man, what is it to me if one man dies and I keep my position? Really, what is that to me? But more on that later. That's not what took me down. What took me down was a few years later, a Samaritan. Some of you may know Samaritans were the half-breeds between Jews and other people, and they were called Samaritans. This Samaritan, Messiah, just like the Yeshua, Messiah, claimed that he was going to dig up these utensils from Moses' day and that they were holy utensils. And people